Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Selling Your Leadership Message, How to Become Your Own Best Advocate, Win Friends, and Influence People. Ryan and I are very happy you're joining us today. Now, we actually first taught this class in Montreal a couple months ago, and we had a very energetic and enthusiastic crowd, so we're excited to be presenting this class again. And a lot of you may be thinking, what value can marketing techniques bring to me in my day-to-day life? And the reality is in that today's environment, perception and your professional brand really can influence a lot of what you're able to get done every day. And by managing your personal brand, defining your value proposition for the initiatives you're seeking to push, and crafting effective communications, you can become your own best advocate so you're able to gain buy-in and position yourself for success. This is especially important because, as many of us probably know, and as Ryan and I definitely know, it's not hard coming up with good ideas. The hard part is convincing others to support the ideas that you're proposing. Now, that's where having a marketing mindset can help. By thinking about how to position your initiative, how to communicate your message through various channels, and how to present your ideas, you can position yourself as a leader and by extension, position your initiative for success. So before we get started, a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions about any of the content we're discussing today, Ryan, they can put them in the Q&A box.
Exactly. And the Q&A box should be located in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. And so you can go ahead and select it to all attendees or to ourselves privately, and we can go ahead and address those.
Yes, and if you have any questions about the content or any questions you'd like answered, we'll have some time for that at the end of the presentation. And if you have any technical questions about the webinar, you can post them there as well. So let's kick things off. Just a quick introduction to who we are. I'm Melissa Henley. I'm the Director of Marketing Communications at Laserfiche. I've been with Laserfiche for about 11 years, and I've been working in the marketing industry for longer than that. I like to say if my marketing career were a person, it would be approaching the age where it could legally drink. So I have a wide variety of experience working not just in technology, but in education and finance. Some of you may recognize me from past IIMC conferences. I serve on the IIMC Foundation Board of Directors, and I'm the chair of the marketing committee. And I'm really pleased to be joined by Ryan Park today. Ryan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you for that, Melissa. Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Park. I'm the Software Marketing Associate for the Government Vertical Marketing team here at Laserfiche. In my role, I focus on state and local government and have a real passion for it. Previously, I worked in the communications office at a municipality and studied policy planning and development at the University of Southern California. In fact, I enjoyed it so much that I'm in the process of getting my master's as well. Now I'll turn it back to you, Melissa.
As Ryan actually doesn't just work with our government customers by day, he also studies public administration by night. So Ryan is truly devoted to public service. So in the 90 minutes we have today, we're going to cover a few topics. We'll begin by discussing the importance of developing a value proposition for yourself and your initiatives. Then we'll discuss different forms of communication: written, verbal, and body language. We'll also discuss how to handle differences in communication styles, particularly when multiple generations are involved. We'll also cover how to connect meaningfully with groups when giving presentations. And don't worry, as we said, we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. So let's get started. First, value propositions. This is a key marketing tactic that has a lot of applicability to your day-to-day life. In marketing terms, a value proposition is the answer you have to one simple question: why should your ideal prospect buy from you rather than any of your competitors? Now, in business terms, understanding your project's value helps with something equally important: driving the desired behavior in your organization. Now, in marketing terms, when you communicate value, you need everyone to have a clear understanding of your value proposition. And this has the same impact when you're trying to drive change and gather support for a technology initiative. But you just need to think about it a slightly different way. Why should someone care about my initiative? Should they support my initiative over someone else's? What's in it for them? Now, it seems simple, right, Ryan?
Absolutely.
But it's sometimes hard to come up with answers to this question. It can sometimes be confusing. It's oftentimes the answer is very long, drawn out, particularly from the perspective of the listener. So if you're thinking about an initiative that you're proposing in your organization, you really need to be able to state this clearly, preferably in about 10 words or so. You need to think about it like a marketing campaign. You have to sell the idea. It's your job to create a vision for the future. But to create this vision, you have to understand the benefit, not just for you, but for the people you're talking to. So let's look at how that can happen. There's been a lot of discussion about running government like a business. And what are some of those business tactics and techniques we can apply to government? And here's one way that can happen, at least from the marketing side. So you all see on the screen the iPod, the original first one that I'm sure many of you had. I had it. Ryan, did you have one?
Yes, I did indeed.
Okay, so at least in this room, two of us had owned this. And I'm sure many of you remember when the iPod came out, it was pretty revolutionary. Back then, I remember I had a Discman, but I still had my old Walkman because a Discman would skip if you tried to take it if you were running. Back then I was training for a marathon, so the Discman would always skip. So I actually had my old Walkman with my tapes. And so when the iPod came out, it pretty much changed the industry. It was the only device that could offer that at the time. 1,000 songs in your pocket, your whole music library with you. And there's a great value proposition. 1,000 songs in your pocket. It's unique to Apple. It was the only device that could offer it at that time. It was appealing. People really wanted it. People didn't want to carry around, remember the CD binders?
Oh, absolutely.
Didn't want to carry around the CD binders, didn't want to carry around the crates of tapes. And so it has all the ingredients of a great value proposition. It's clear, appealing, unique, and it's exclusive to the iPod. Now, of course, that's not really the clear value of the iPod. I mean, if you think about it from the perspective of the developers who developed the iPod, they probably wouldn't say that's a key differentiator of the iPod. They'd probably tell you about the anti-skip technology or, some technology they built that made the song switching really fast. And of course, for Apple as a company, that's not the value. I mean, they want to sell a lot of iPods and make a lot of money. But for the consumer, the value is they have all their music all the time. And so you can see the difference in perspective there. And this value proposition was so clear and worked so well, they used it again. This is when the Nano came out. 1,000 songs in your pocket changed everything. Here we go again. And then they used it again when the new classics came out with the 20 and 40 gigabytes. I didn't have one of those, but I have one of the 120 gigabyte ones still hanging around my house. It still works. But that one, they used 10,000 songs in your pocket. And so it just kept growing. In fact, that still works, although I had to Google. I took it with me on a cruise and I had to Google how to change the volume because it had been so long since they used it, but it's still kicking. So the end result, 100 million iPods sold. So that from a consumer and marketing perspective is what happens when you hone in on a strong value proposition. It's that you really get to the heart of why consumers want your product. And when you're thinking about an initiative that you're proposing or trying to promote in your organization, it's sort of the same thing. You want to get to the heart of why it matters to someone. And of course, we're talking about iPods and we're talking about Apple. So let's talk about Steve Jobs for a minute. Because, Ryan, have you read the biography of Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson?
No, but I've heard many, many great things about it. Melissa, why don't you tell us more about it?
Ryan's heard many, many great things about it, primarily from me. One of the things I really took away from reading this is that Steve Jobs really beat his head into a wall finding the value proposition of his companies. Pixar, which you can see the logo up there, it didn't start as an animation studio. They started selling hardware and they made the films to show what the hardware could do. And what Steve Jobs was like, hey, wait. Forget this hardware. I mean, these films, this is what we need to be selling. And he was famous for asking two really important questions when he was trying to determine the value of whatever they were trying to promote. And it was so what? Well, actually, it was so effing what, but for the sake of clarity and modesty, we'll stick with so what. And it's really, so what? Why does this matter to the customer? What's the benefit? The customer has a million other choices. Why will this one matter to them? And so when you think about that from the perspective of an initiative that you're trying to promote, you can think about it from the so what question. It really does boil down a lot of decisions. So what? You're trying to promote a initiative to automate public records requests. So what? And if you can't answer that so what question, then you're going to have a really hard time convincing people of its value. And so when you're thinking through how to position your initiative, there are a couple questions that will help you answer the so what question that Steve Jobs was famous for asking. And these are questions we ask in marketing all the time. Appeal. How much do I desire this offer? Or, in your terms, what's in it for me? Exclusivity. Where else can I get this? Obviously, in consumer terms, it would be like, can I walk to the store next door and buy this something similar for less money? But in, business terms, it's, is someone else offering me this? Is this something only you can do? Credibility, of course, the famous, what's the likelihood this is going to work? And am I going to waste my political capital supporting you? Remember, every time you ask someone to support you, they're giving up a little bit of something of their own credibility. So this is an important question to answer. And of course, clarity. What are you actually offering? Do I even understand what you're trying to get me to support? Do I understand how it will benefit me and what the value really is? So let's talk about this from a perspective of an initiative you might actually be trying to implement. So Ryan, say someone's trying to automate public records requests. I mean, obviously the benefits for me as a city clerk are clear. It's faster, it's easier. I could spend time on other things. But do you think that would fly with finance, legal, city manager's office?
I think we need to dissect it a little bit further here and and look at the different types of measurements that you've mentioned in the value proposition, Melissa. In this case, we're going to be focusing on the public records requests. And by saying what Melissa mentioned and measuring value propositions, here's the questions that it boils down to. What are the benefits for you? Is it easier? Is it faster? Will this allow you to allocate more time towards other ongoing or major initiatives? Through evaluation, what if you walked into finance, legal, or the city manager's office and say, hey, why don't you get on board with this? It will make your life so much easier. Melissa, what do you think their reaction might be to that?
Probably not great. I've tried that myself with our CEO once when I was trying to implement an initiative. I'm like, the software will make my life so much easier. And the answer was, yeah, so?
Exactly. Not great, right? But there are some other ways you can spin this. How about if you're talking to the city manager and you say, with this initiative, you'll have a one-stop shop to review and approve records before they're released, saving you time and effort so you don't have to spend your precious moments sorting through filing folders. It's just one click from your phone. And that's something that might also be appealing to, let's say, the finance office, where if they automate records requests, they can accept payment online. So not only will they increase revenue generation, but they'll also save the time their staff spends gathering, copying records for distribution. And especially during budget season, I'm sure they would really appreciate this as well. And now from a legal perspective, if we automate records requests, certainly the value here can be that they can automatically redact sensitive information before it gets sent out. With this measuring your value proposition, it comes down to the following questions. What's in it for them? How will they react? Why should they care? And taking this, Melissa, we'll talk about managing your message and how this correlates with communication and knowing your audience. Melissa, take it away.
Thanks, Ryan. It really does come down to managing your message and understanding who you're talking to. Part of thinking through the value proposition of your initiative is understanding the point of view of the different stakeholders that you're going to be communicating with. Obviously, the initiative Ryan was talking about, same initiative, it's still automating public records requests, but he was able to highlight different aspects that would appeal to different groups in order to hopefully get their buy-in and get them on his side. But when it comes to communicating that, it doesn't really, having a great idea and a message and understanding the audience doesn't matter if you're not communicating it out. And communicating doesn't matter if you're not managing the message that's getting out. So let's talk a little bit about how you do that. Now, I'm sure all of you deal with email, and probably a lot of it. Ryan, how many emails do you get a day?
I would say around 100 would be an average.
Yeah, so you get about 100. I get about 300. The average person receives 110 emails a day. So email is one of those ways that everyone on this call communicates through email pretty frequently, probably more frequently than the phone. I know I'm guilty of, I could get up and walk over to the other side of the office, but it's faster to send an email. And every email you send affects your professional reputation, your professional brand. People form an opinion of you based on how you communicate, and that affects how they're going to perceive any initiative you want to implement. I mean, I'm sure everyone has a colleague that when you get an email from them, you think, oh no, not again. You know, that one colleague that you do something for them and they send an email back and it says, thanks. You're like, what? Why? Come on, I did something nice for you. And in reality, they mean thanks, exclamation point, but you read it as thanks. So managing your message, managing your tone in email is crucial. It's often the first introduction that people have to us, particularly constituents, and it's one of the most important places to manage your professional brand. So a couple things to be aware of with emails. Are they too long? Sometimes it's, really easy to start sending a backstory the length of War and Peace. And, there's a meme that goes around Twitter every so often that I survived a meeting that should have been an email. But on the flip side, sometimes there's emails that should have been meetings. So if your email is getting into War and Peace territory, it's probably a sign that everyone should get in the room and talk about it. I recently read a really good article on the Harvard Business Review website. And if you guys aren't subscribed to their newsletter, I highly encourage it. They have really interesting blogs and always have really interesting topics. But this was lessons you can learn from the military in your email. And one of them was that in the military, they try to keep all their emails to one screen or less. And I thought that was really important. Be concise. Don't bury your message in paragraphs and paragraphs and expect people to read them because they won't. And of course, watch who you're CCing. Do you need to CC a cast of thousands? Or are you just communicating to the people that need to hear your message? And on the flip side of making sure you're concise is don't start your message in the middle of your thought process. You may have thought through the whole thing, and sometimes when you're communicating your email, you just get to that last paragraph. People read and say, wait, what? How did we get here? So again, read your email through. Make sure it's understandable. Make sure it's clear. I went to a management training once where they suggested mind mapping your email. That's just ridiculous. No one has time to mind map an email and, outline an email. However, everyone, it is worthwhile to type out an email, read it. If it's an important email, have a trusted colleague read it. Make sure it makes sense and it's clear and it's concise. And then, of course, don't make it hard for people to take action on your emails. That same Harvard Business Review article talked about something, of course, military being the military has an acronym for everything. They call it the BLUF, the bottom line up front. Those of us who may have familiarity with journalism by being on the high school or college newspaper recognize it as don't bury the lead, don't type 4 paragraphs and then have your ask at the bottom because most people will never get there. Our attention spans are short. Social media makes it even shorter. So make sure you're not making it hard for people to figure out what you're asking them to do, because if you do, chances are they'll never get to it. But of course, email is only one way we communicate. And social media is, I would say it's top of mind lately. Wouldn't you, Ryan?
I would say so, definitely.
Yeah, it feels like you can't turn on the news anymore without hearing, well, so-and-so responded through Twitter. It's getting to the point where Twitter is what formal statements used to be. You know, you'd release a statement to the media, and now everyone's just doing it through Twitter. And I will say that nuance is not exactly best captured in 140 characters. When you're using social media, whether on behalf of yourself or your company, it's really easy to go astray, especially if you're representing your municipality. There's too many horror stories of people who have accidentally mixed up the personal and the professional accounts. And, just Google social media horror stories and you can read about them all day. But it's not feasible anymore to stay off of social media. I mean, Ryan, where do you get the majority of your news?
I would probably say definitely, whether it be just searching it online or more likely through social media too, but whatever really appears in notifications and over the phone as well.
Yeah, I would say 100% I get my news through push notifications to my phone or Twitter. And for better or worse, that's the majority of people are engaging more and more with social media. I live here in Long Beach where Laserfiche's headquarters are, and we're fortunate that we have a very socially engaged city government where our mayor, city clerk, all the different city departments are on Twitter, and that's how I find out about what's happening in our city. And so they've really making an effort to engage. And of course, it's in the paper, but I follow all the city papers on Twitter too. But so, depending on your municipality, it's probably not reasonable to stay off of social media entirely. So how do you effectively use social media, whether it's for your personal or your professional? So the biggest piece of advice I would give is to relax. Even though Twitter is rapidly replacing the formal statements issued to media, there's still that expectation of informality in that it's not a formal press release. I would encourage you to find a few people whose tone and style you admire on various social media channels and look at how they post, look at the tone they use, and strive to emulate that. You don't want to be too informal with like the haha hashtag TTYL, where people are going to be like, what is Melissa even talking about? That doesn't make any sense. But also, you don't want to go too far in the opposite direction where Melissa is proud to announce that she will be presenting on a webinar. So you need to really balance that personal. But also, you don't want to relax too much. With social media, it can be very, very easy to rapidly get sucked into being too informal and going astray, especially when it comes to humor. Some topics, are sort of safe to joke about, sports, the weather. Sports, depending on your location, I would say.
That's very true.
Know your audience, but other things it's probably safest to avoid talking about depending on your audience. The best piece of advice is to really aim for a level of professionalism that's equivalent to the way you'd speak to a group of trusted colleagues. Relaxed, but respectful. And pay attention to your platform. A business-like tone is perfectly acceptable on LinkedIn, but might appear out of place on Facebook. personally, I don't Facebook. So I'm looking at Ryan here to nod at me and say like, yes, that's exactly how people use Facebook. And the same rule for Twitter goes for Twitter and email is that you really need to watch your tone, because in general, people will assume that whatever you're posting is about 20 to 30% meaner than what you intend. And that's because people are notoriously bad at judging what we intend to write, how it will sound to the person reading it. And in general, they'll assume it's worse than you intended. It goes back to the example of the person who emails you back saying thanks with a period, and you read it as thanks with that tone, like, gee, thanks, with the sarcasm, when really what they meant is, hey, thanks for helping me out. And so always assume that or always realize people will assume the worst of whatever you've written. So you really need to be clear and never hesitate, especially if you're communicating something controversial or challenging via social media, whether it's, decision that the city council has made or another type of decision. You can always have someone else read it to make sure it's clear, run it past legal, and make sure that it's clear, concise, and understandable. And of course, something that I think people have forgotten, or at least some of the people that I see on Twitter, is that the internet is forever. And that goes for email too. If you put it in writing and send it out on the internet, it's not going away. Doesn't matter if you delete it, it's always there. So whatever you put in writing, you better be comfortable seeing it on the front page of a newspaper. Or explaining it to your mother or your children. That's generally the rule that I use. If I don't feel comfortable justifying it to my boss, I'm not going to put it in writing. I'll pick up the phone and say it instead. So that doesn't mean you can't email your colleagues, but be sure you can live with whatever you've written. And just assume anyone can see anything on your social networks. And it's always a good idea with your social networks to go back every so often and look at what you've posted. Generally people will see what you've posted, one post at a time, except when it matters, except when it's a member of the city council, except when it's a citizen who's looking back to see like, I wonder what Melissa's been saying. And then they'll go back through the last month or so and really look at what you've been saying. So that's a good way to monitor your tone. It's a good way to see overall what image you're putting out via social media. But communicating by email and social media is only one way that we communicate with the public and our colleagues. And there are some other ways that we communicate with the public that can really have an impact on how people view us. Right, Ryan?
Absolutely. An important part of your professional brand is how you communicate with and provide services to the public. I remember hearing a story about how a police chief responded to a public records request and inadvertently released sensitive info that should have been redacted. Though this individual thought he or she was doing one's civic duty, it instead caused a PR nightmare. Now, could all of this have been prevented if there was a level of consistency on the message? If the process has been designed in a way that allowed the municipality to communicate effectively and stay on message, the outcome might have been brighter. It's not just about one, but it's about the many, like the entire organization and the citizens it serves. Unfortunately, it's not uncommon for government agencies to experience lag times in responding to Freedom of Information Acts or Freedom of Information Law requests. Without an efficient records management strategy in place, responding to a request can involve a trip to the records room to find the appropriate storage box, locate and photocopy the requested documents, and then mail it to the photocopies to its citizens. And that all affects the perception that the public has of its municipality and potentially of you. Using electronic forms, governments can quickly fulfill requests for documents that aren't available online, which helps organizations comply with records legislation. For example, many public records laws set strict timelines for responding to a request. By collecting public records request information via in online form, notifications can be automatically routed and stakeholders updated as the process progresses. So when a citizen like, let's say Melissa, finds a request, the responding department is immediately notified of the new request via email. Then, upon receipt of the request by the responding department, the content management software will send an email to Melissa stating that the request has been received and will be responded to within a given time period. This helps cities, counties, and state agencies maintain compliance with public records mandates while expediting the process of administering the request for citizens like Melissa. In fact, the city of Ithaca, New York uses an e-forms to collect public records requests, and since implementing this process has seen a 35% reduction in time it takes to respond to these requests. Given that the city receives over 1,000 requests annually, this equates to over 7,000 hours saved each year.
I'm sure citizens like Melissa appreciate it.
Absolutely. Now, when it comes to communicating with the public, there's also another point. Ultimately, when we look beyond records requests, and when you want to provide updates over social media, you're updating the public. When the post updates through public notices and allows citizens to comment, this increases transparency and accountability. So let's look at how the public notice process is a method of communicating with the public and how it can change the way it engages the community. Publishing public notices in newspapers informs citizens of what's happening, particularly those who don't visit your website. But there are more efficient ways to manage the public notice process. So this brings up some good value proposition questions like, how does this impact not just your brand, but your municipalities, positioning you as a forward-thinking tech leader? Newspapers are one way, but there are other ways. Public portals can be utilized as self-service models to get and share information. And automating these public notice processes is one way to improve the way you provide services to the public and their perception. For example, consider how your coworkers would feel if you were able to visit a web form, choose the type of public notice describing the public meetings, agendas, capital improvement projects, what have you, and experiencing how long it needs to be published for, uploading supplemental documents and comments right there. It's easier for them, meaning that it's a one-stop shop, not having to scroll through a sea of emails or physical newspapers, and it's easier for you getting comments in a folder. But it gets better. From there, what if the notice is automatically sent to an intake group for review? What if your public information officer were automatically notified and legal were automatically notified to take a look? And during the entire process, the requester is automatically emailed, so they're in the loop about the status. Melissa, wouldn't that improve the way you interact with your colleagues per se?
Yeah, it would certainly be a lot easier than running around chasing people down.
Oh yes, I remember having to get signatures, straight down the corridor. That was certainly, you can anticipate and almost tell the type of person that would walk through the hallways just by the way that they stepped. But let's take a look at these next steps, communicating with the public, providing the information they need. Consider providing a link to the public portal where the information is posted. When it's active, individuals can submit these public comments through the portal where they're sent to the requester. This self-service model is what citizens have come to expect from government. On-demand services such as Amazon have set citizen expectations for customer-centric industries, and automating the public notice process is one way you can impact the way you communicate with the public. Self-service portals are another. Let's talk a little bit more about how they can impact the way you communicate with the public. The ultimate solution to a backlog in public records requests is a self-service model. Using content management, government organizations can post select public documents online, which allows citizens to quickly and easily access commonly sought information on demand. When a big box store applied to set up shop in 2 locations in the city of Fontana, California, the city knew the retailer's opponents would inundate the clerk's office with information requests. This prompted Fontana to rethink how it handles processing these requests. Using a technology solution, the city created a public portal where residents can easily access these records from URLs provided by the city clerk when a request was made. For this project in particular, the records portal included web pages for both projects, FAQs for those frequently asked questions, a calendar of public hearings, and then a news for public meetings about other milestones. Fontana also used Facebook and Twitter to increase transparency by announcing updates to it about its projects. And by letting citizens locate the documents themselves using the online portal, city staff saved an estimated 10 to 20 hours per month that otherwise would have been spent manually, responding to these requests online. The city's proactive approach was so successful in streamlining information requests that it plans to post these public records associated with future high-res visibility projects on the public portal.
Wow, Ryan, it sounds like they really took a lot of what we've been talking about in this section and tied it all together. The social media, the public records requests, the portal, public notices, public hearings, and really brought it all together in one place to make it easier to communicate with the public.
Absolutely. They use these different channels as a way of engaging to the wider audience, depending upon their customizable or preference for getting the type of news that they would prefer. And so now that we've talked about several use cases around communicating with the public, Melissa, will you go into talking about communicating in a multi-general office?
Yeah, so Ryan brings up a good point about different communication channels, and that's people like to be communicated to in a lot of different ways. I mentioned I get my news via Twitter most of the time, Twitter or push notifications to my phone, and I would venture a guess that has to do a lot with my age. Because as much as we've considered how we're communicating and the message we're sending, does it really matter when you're trying to communicate with people of different generations? Does having does putting a great article in the newspaper matter to a millennial? Does, sending a great email matter to a boomer? It's everyone's favorite time. We're going to talk about generations. And I will say, when we presented this in Montreal, this was probably the most engaging section of the class. And I actually got a lot out of the discussion. We had some really, really engaging discussion from different groups in the class. So hopefully you all will get equally as much out of it today.
I know I will, Melissa.
Oh, Ryan. So why this is important is not just because your municipality is made up of a lot of different generations. It's because your workplace likely is too. Today, you're likely working with 4 different generations. They're traditionalists or the silent generation, boomers, Gen Xers, and of course our millennials who were born 1981 and 1977. But within the next 3 years, we're going to have 5 generations working together as our Gen Z will be joining the workplace. And Gen Z are those who are born after 1997. And this is always a really controversial topic. Every so often I'll be saying something like, millennials. And I think probably at some point, boomer was like, Gen Xers. Because every generation brings its own particular strengths to the table. Now, before we get into this, I just want to say I work with mostly millennials, and I really enjoy working with them. I really like their energy, their fire, their refusal to sit back and wait. I really do find them incredibly energizing, and I really do mean it when I say they keep me young. However, sometimes they just make me want to bang my head into a wall. Why can't they just wait their turn? Why do they think everything they say has equal weight to something that someone with 20 or 30 years of experience has to say? But I'm sure someone said that about me at some point, because it's easy to stereotype generations. And this is coming from a cynical slacker Gen Xer. No matter the age or the generation, it's really, really easy to just be like, those millennials, those Gen Xers. And may I just add, when I looked at the picture of the Gen Xers on the slide, my first reaction was, man, why did my millennial designer pick a picture of such old people to represent Gen Xers? Then I realized poor Gen Xers, not only are we literally in the middle of the two most highly studied generations, we're also now the middle-aged generation. So shout out to all the other Gen Xers in the crowd. But it's important to think about generations because millennials are our fastest growing segment of the workforce. They're also the most difficult to retain and recruit to working in the public sector. And they're likely consuming government services. And they probably want to consume services in a different way than boomers or Gen Xers. And it's important to consider all those different communication perspectives, not just in your office, but in your municipality as well. So let's talk a little bit about those communication preferences. So generally, each group prefers different types of communication. Now, I will preface this by saying this is a generalization. Everything about generations is a generalization. It's right there in the name, generation, generalization. But it's important to consider so you are making the best decisions for an initiative that will benefit all groups equally. So if you're looking at your communication preferences and communication media, you can see our silent generation here prefers face-to-face communication or formal letter. You contrast that with, Gen Xers who want text messaging or email versus millennials who want mobile and online. And you can see there's some conflicts there. If you, present an online portal to boomers or, the silent generation, is that going to be a method that they prefer? It's important because this doesn't just apply to the people you work with, it applies to your citizens as well. And it also applies to how you think through the conversations that you're having. I know many, many times I've had awkward conversations over text with millennials that I work with, and I may think it's rude, but to them it's just how they do business. It's just their day-to-day work style. And I can either be angry or I can adjust, and we can learn how to work together productively. So that's something to really think about. It's where technology comes in. Standardizing processes and implementing technology can make it easier to define clear communication channels. So you can standardize these common modes of communication. So with things like forms, it's no more, did you read my email? There isn't necessarily a debate. It's not, why didn't I know this? Or you didn't read my email. Why didn't you talk to me? It's, hey, this all starts with a form. Something like when Ryan was talking about public notice requests, it's not, hey, Melissa, why are you ignoring my email? It's like, I submitted the form. I got the notification that it was, that it was received. We're all on the same page. And this is actually an issue I speak about quite frequently. I mentioned I taught this class in Montreal, and the time before that, there was a boomer who had managed a mixed age team, and she was really frustrated because, she was aggravated. She called team members and they would text or email back a response. She didn't understand why people wouldn't pick up the phone. She felt disrespected and unappreciated. On the flip side, when I taught this class in Montreal, there was a millennial who shared how they were planning an event for her city, and she shared, and she was sharing some ideas about what she thought would appeal to young families because she was someone with a young family. And she was shot down by boomers in her office because, quote, my favorite words, no, because this is the way it's always been done. And same thing, she felt disrespected and unappreciated by her team. So you can see it happens on both sides. And it's really a matter of communicating and being open to new ideas. Because these differences, it's not just in what we communicate or our openness to ideas, it's differences in communication mode, picking up, sending a text message when people expect you to pick up the phone, coming to talk to someone face to face when they'd rather get a text message, that can create tension. And you as a leader really need to build an arsenal of communication techniques. So again, I will preface this by saying this is a generalization. The silent generation really prefer to be communicated to either face-to-face or with a formal letter. Boomers really, again, like one-on-one communication, phone or email if required. Gen Xers and millennials tend to be pretty similar where they like text, email, mobile options because they're generally the ones who are, they refer to Gen Xers as digital immigrants, while millennials are digital natives. And who knows what Gen Z will bring to the workplace. They're going to have phones implanted in their heads or something. But these are all things to consider when you're thinking about an initiative, not just with the people in your office, but with your citizens as well. So, Ryan, let's think about the initiative we were talking about earlier with automating the public records request office. How could we position that to different groups?
Yeah, what would certainly be a different point of delivery can certainly be one through mail. So when a request comes in, they can certainly mail it to those who prefer to receive a hard copy of it. Another point of contact can be that if they prefer the one-on-one contact, they can certainly come into the office upon the request and be delivered a time that they can come in and get the request for their public record. And another point would be via email, and they can be notified and be attached the record depending upon what it is, of course, and if it's allowed to be emailed out in a certain format as well. And so there are definitely some different ways of delivery depending upon the preferences that can be marked by those who are requesting these sorts of records, Melissa.
Exactly. So this is one way when you're positioning your initiative and trying to get people on board that you want to show that you've thought through the appeal to different segments of your municipality, whether it's we're going to have self-service from our website, we'll provide it through an app, we will email, we'll have the ability to email it when someone fills out a form, we'll have a kiosk in the office that people can come and fill it out, or we'll just mail it directly to them. So it's all, again, it's the generational, I like to say conflict, the opportunity to learn and work with different generations is always present in our offices, but it's equally as important with the people that live in our municipalities as well. I know for myself, my neighbor down the street came and was like, "Hey, can you sign this petition so we can have a meeting?" And I was like, "A meeting? What? You want me to come to a meeting?" I like go to work and I come home. That's what I do. But it's important. I'm like, can we have this meeting online? Can I watch it from home? And so it is thinking through how this benefits different groups. And again, going back to the value proposition, positioning it for different groups that are likely to be affected. But of course, you're not just always going to be communicating one-on-one. Sometimes you'll be tasked with presenting in front of a group, whether it's at an internal meeting, a council meeting, on a webinar, or even at a conference. So you need to feel comfortable with one-to-many communication too. And this is a topic I particularly enjoy because I have terrible stage fright. So these are all, I put a lot of research into how to become a more effective presenter. This is a class I teach as well, avoiding presentation panic. So I really enjoy talking about body language and presenting. So we'll see the body language. It's hard without the demonstrating. So we'll see how well we can talk through this. But when you're presenting in front of a group, the same things we've been talking about this morning, they still apply. Who are you talking to? What do they expect to hear? How do they expect to hear it? Because when you anticipate the needs and concerns of your audience, it really helps you to prepare and execute your presentation. You really need to put yourself inside the heads of who you're talking to and imagine yourself hearing what you're saying. Does it excite you? Are you interested? If not, go back to the drawing board and think about, hey, what am I talking about? Am I talking all about what's in it for me? to a group that wants to hear about what's in it for them, let me add a little bit more about what's in it for them. And as far as presentation style, it helps to figure out what you're good at and what you enjoy and add that to your own presentation style. Me, I like to tell stories and I like to ask questions. If you were in a room with me right now, I'd probably be asking a lot of questions and stirring up discussion because, as I like to say, I like to make you do my work. But I also think it's more engaging. In every audience, you're going to have a balance of introverts and extroverts. The extroverts will really enjoy the opportunity to jump in and have the conversation. The introverts will enjoy not being called on and getting to listen. And having lots of questions, hands-on activities, if it's a class, will keep it more engaging than having to listen to one person talk for an extended amount of time. And you also want to appeal to the different ways people learn. Some people are more tactile, some people like to listen, some people are visual, some people need to talk. And so that will really, if you are presenting at a conference or something like that, that will help engage all the different types of learners. And most of all, you really want to care about how important it is for everyone to really understand what you're saying and being able to engage everyone in the room about your topic. Now, granted, you may be talking about, the annual budget or something that's not exactly the most scintillating of topics, but that doesn't mean you can't, that you yourself can't be interested in it. It'll at least make it a little more interesting for everyone else to hear. So in terms of some real basic presentation techniques that you want to be aware of, at the bare minimum, remember to wear clothing that makes you feel comfortable, confident, and professional. Make sure it doesn't shift, that you're not going to be pulling at it, doesn't reveal anything you'd rather keep hidden. It's usually helpful to give it a test run before you actually wear it for when you're presenting, so you don't discover, like, when you're in front of a room of 20 or 30 people that, hey, this shirt actually, is see-through under lights. So while it is tempting to get a new outfit, at least maybe for me, when you're going to be, when you're going to be talking to a group of people, it's always helpful to give it a test run first. Remember, you want to turn your phone off and take it out of your pocket along with any change, lipstick, anything that jingles, anything that you're going to be tempted to play with as you're standing in front of the group. Of course, interact with people as they enter the room, say hi, let them know you're happy that they're there. Of course, be animated. You want to appear excited to be there. And typically, for those of us that get nervous when we're speaking in front of a group, our tendency is to speed up when we talk. That's generally a sign of nerves. A good tip for that, if you think that might be you, is 1, to breathe, but 2, also to speak a little more slowly than you would normally. If you speak slowly, you'll generally speed up if you're nervous. So by speaking more slowly than you would normally, when you speed up, when you get nervous, you'll end up speaking at a normal pace. And of course, if you're speaking somewhere that has audio-visual equipment, you want to test your microphone before you begin. If you're speaking on a conference call or a WebEx like this one, you want to test it. Give yourself plenty of time to set up. And my very favorite, Ryan and I are both in Toastmasters. And in Toastmasters, if anyone on the out in webinar land is active in Toastmasters, there's something called the Wizard of Oz. And Ryan, would you like to explain what the Wizard of Oz does?
Sure. The Wizard of Oz in Toastmasters is the person who counts the ums, the ahs, the so's, and those filler words that we oftentimes saying. And I just caught myself saying and so in that case, I would count myself 1. But back to you, Melissa.
Yeah, so the Wizard of Oz will count those filler words that really water down your message. So be conscious of using filler words. You don't have to go as far as to count them when you're talking, but do be conscious of avoiding the ums and ahs. And one way you can do that is by taking a breath every now and then. It does help you relax and reduces that filler language. You can also pause. Some will think it's a dramatic pause, but really it may just be for you to gather your thoughts before you go on to the next topic rather than saying, kinda, sorta. And of course, don't forget to be early. It's especially if you're presenting at an event. See, I just caught myself saying, it's why it's good to have a Wizard of Oz. You become very conscious of it. You definitely want to give yourself time to be early. Give yourself time to adjust to anything that might not be as planned. There's nothing worse than walking into a meeting right on schedule and finding out your computer's dead. The presenter doesn't have your PowerPoint. So give yourself a little buffer time. But of course, whether you're presenting at a meeting, you're talking one-on-one with a colleague, you are presenting in front of a larger group, you really need to pay attention to your nonverbal communication. Now, from the point of view of the people you're talking to, sad but true, your nonverbal communication matters more than your voice and far more than what you're actually saying. And being aware of your body language, it really matters for meetings. It matters for one-on-one interactions. It matters when you're trying to convince someone of something. It matters when you're trying to build those relationships with people that you're going to need to get on your side. Now, you can see a few of these on the slide, but there's a few to highlight, particularly crossing your arms. When you cross your arms, you may be thinking, I'm cold. It's cold in this room. I'm going to cross my arms to get comfortable. But you're actually sending a subtle message that you're not open to others and that you feel threatened. It looks to the audience like you're being defensive. And crossing your legs when you're standing, it isn't great either. It betrays nervousness. And again, this is something you don't want to convey. When you're presenting, you want to use what's called neutral stance. Back straight, head high, chest and arms open. This stance makes you look approachable and conveys that you have authority and confidence in your message. And of course, there's a lot of other tics. Avoid shaking your legs, leaning too far back, looking bored to be there. This is an interesting topic to learn more about. There are some power poses that once you learn about them, you'll be like, I recognize that. That's why so-and-so always does that. Particularly leaning back in the chair with the arm up is a definite power pose. Now, a few other things is when you're presenting and talking to someone, particularly one-on-one, you want to watch your eye contact. You want to make eye contact with the person you're talking to. And particularly if you're not comfortable with the conversation, it can be really challenging to make eye contact. And in fact, if you're nervous, you can unconsciously avoid making eye contact. But looking people in the eye is one way of showing that you feel secure and confident, even if you don't. So if you are presenting at a meeting or in front of a group, remember, you don't want to stare at a single point in the audience, and you also don't want to play tennis where you randomly scan the audience, which can also make you appear nervous. Instead, you want to try and look at various people in the audience. This way, audience members will feel that they matter and they pay closer attention. One good trick is to pick out 3 or 4 people in the audience and look at them when you talk, pick them at different parts of the room, and that will really help people feel like you're not necessarily staring at one person, but if you look in their direction, that you're sort of varying where you're looking. And you're not necessarily just scanning back and forth over the room. Now, posture, you don't want to stand in one place for the entire presentation because you're afraid you will trip and fall. This is why you really want to wear comfortable shoes. And sometimes ladies' comfort comes before heights. And I will say this as someone who wishes that she were 4 inches taller. If you don't feel grounded and comfortable in your shoes, whether they're high or low, don't wear them. You want to be able to move around comfortably. And this isn't just so you can get steps on your Fitbit. The brain needs movement to stay alert. So it's partially for you and it's partially for the people you're talking to. Moving around in the space around you when you're presenting is a powerful way to keep an audience attentive. But don't overdo it. You don't want to walk too much or too fast because that can also make you appear nervous. Move whenever it makes sense and helps to convey your message. For example, if you're presenting a list of 3 different points, you can Talk about point 1 when you're at your first position. Take 2 or 3 steps and talk about point 2, and then take 2 or 3 more steps to talk about point 3. Needless to say, don't fidget. Fidget means nervousness, and nervousness is a distraction. And I say this as someone who's extremely guilty of this. If you give me a podium, I will stand behind it and I will tap my leg while I talk. I'll be completely motionless from the podium up, and behind the podium, I will be tapping my leg. And it is a completely unconscious tic, and I cannot help it. And that's why I can't use podiums. Ryan, do you have any presentation tics?
Certainly I do. I certainly get very anxious and nervous from the start of each presentation, but certainly breathing helps me a lot, and that kind of allows me to then get myself calm and collected. One of the tics that I like to do that I'm trying to stop is to obviously do the fidgeting part of it.
Yeah, fidgeting there's a lot of different ways and different fidgets that, some of us are leg jigglers, some of us, shake our hands, some of us sway back and forth. And really Ryan hit on one of the keys to avoid fidgeting, which is breathing. Breathing helps relax you, but also you need to be aware of it. It's kind of like you can't fight a battle you don't know that you're fighting. You need to be conscious of what you're doing, and that's the only way to avoid fidgeting. This is something I learned a long time ago, and it's extremely uncomfortable, but if you are serious about combating your fidgeting and improving your presenting skills, it really helps to watch yourself presenting. And whether that's, you set your iPhone up and you film yourself talking just in your living room, or you actually, are presenting and talking at a council meeting or in some other, venue, and you watch the tape, which none of us like to watch or listen to ourselves, but it is really valuable where you can see what you're actually doing. And it really does help you improve, because you have to actively work to correct a lot of these things. It's not like one day you'll wake up and be like, guess what? I don't jiggle my leg anymore. I have perfect neutral stance. I stand perfectly, I'm using my arms properly, and I'm able to walk and talk at the same time. All of these things have to be learned. And for those of us that are leg jigglers, it signals to the audience that we as speakers are uncomfortable and restless. And that's not how we want to appear. We want to appear confident, whether it's in a one-on-one interaction, in front of a meeting, or in front of an audience. And so remember to breathe, remember to smile, remember to, it sounds corny, but if you believe it, you can achieve it. And part of confidence in presenting starts with believing that you are a good presenter. And so until you actually believe that you're a good presenter, you're not going to get to that point. So if you believe, I'm confident, I'm a good presenter, people are going to listen to me and value what I have to say, then people will actually follow suit. So we've actually covered a lot today, but there are a few points that I would like to emphasize. The first is that everyone's job is marketing. You should always be marketing yourself, monitoring your personal brand, being aware of what people think of you and your department, and marketing your initiatives. To do that, you need to consider the viewpoints of your colleagues, your boss, your citizens when you make decisions. How should you describe it in terms they care about? That's the core of a value proposition, and that will help you get them on your side. And one way to do this, in the words of Stephen Covey, is seek first to understand, then to be understood. If any of you have ever attended another one of my webinars or classes, you'll realize this is in like every single takeaway slide that I ever do. And it's because I really believe this is at the core of most leadership principles, whether it has to do with, successfully implementing change initiatives or developing a value proposition or really anything else. It's understanding the other person's perspective. It really means you don't say what you want to say. You understand what your audience wants to hear. It's not about you. As much as, sometimes we all wish that we were, we really wish it really is about the other person. And that goes for whether you're talking to someone or thinking about someone who's in a different generation, works in a different department, has a different viewpoint from you. It has to do with being able to look at things from their perspective and understand where they're coming from. I mean, we've used public records requests a few times as an example because it's a good example where there's a lot of different viewpoints to consider. It's a process that touches a lot of different departments. And when you think about it from the perspective of a different department and what they want to hear and what the value is to them, you're thinking more like a leader and you're able to get them more on board. And remember, when it comes to marketing yourself and your initiatives, perception often equals reality. So it's really important to manage the image you're presenting to your colleagues and the public. This is where thinking about all these ways you present yourself comes in handy. You want your constituents to be raving about, my city's so awesome. They're all over social media. It makes it so easy for me to get news. They have the best app. It's so convenient. I can, if there's any graffiti, I can report it right away through the app. Or if there's a pothole, all I have to do is click a button and I can report it right away. That's the perception that you want your citizens to have. And with the right kind of leadership, you can get the rest of your city on board with the initiatives that you're seeking to implement. So Ryan and I are really pleased that you took the time to join us today. And in fact, Ryan, would you like to cover how folks will be able to get their CMC and MMC points for joining us today? Absolutely. Thank you, Melissa. Now that attendees have heard us talk about selling their leadership message for about over an hour now, I'm pleased to talk about what's in it for them. So in terms of what's the value there, IMC members looking to receive credit for the course will be emailed a copy of the webinar recording, PowerPoint slides, and an online learning assessment after the live event. What's really great about this year's learning assessment is that it's through an electronic form, which will be reviewed upon submission. And if everything checks out, the assessment submitters will be issued a certificate of completion for the course. And so if not everyone had been registered and those who attended this webinar is not on the list to receive the live assessment or the online assessment, then please feel free to email me at ryan.park@laserfiche.com. And with that, is there anything else you'd like to add, Melissa? I, really enjoyed the webinar today. I'm happy everyone was able to join us, and I think we'll be happy to take any questions from the audience. Sounds good. So let's give everyone about a minute or so for them to write any questions if they may have any. But I actually have a question for you, Melissa. Oh. So the first question is, in looking at the 4 different elements of measuring your value proposition, which area do you see needing to be highlighted the most? So if we look back at the 4, you mentioned appeal, exclusivity, credibility, and clarity. So which one would you say would be the one needing the most to be highlighted? I don't know. Ryan, I thought the questions were for the audience, not for you. Well, I think they're all 4 equally important. Obviously you want people to understand what message you're trying to promote, and you want to make sure that they believe that you can actually do it. And but I would say probably for me, it would be a tie between appeal and credibility. You want people to be able to understand what's in it for them, because ultimately, as humans, we're pretty much motivated by our own self-interest. As much, we tend to be altruistic. I will say that in good situations, but in business, in work, not always. We're generally motivated by either what makes us look good or what benefits us. So I would say appeal definitely is tied with credibility, because credibility, am I going to waste my political capital supporting you, is equally as important because it ties right into what's in it for me. Am I going to spend my political capital being like, absolutely, Ryan's public records request initiative is like the best thing since sliced bread. I'm completely on board with it. And then it completely collapses and everyone's like, great job, Melissa. Why did we listen to you? So again, it ties back to that self-preservation.
Absolutely. And it looks as though we have another question here regarding actually, our first question from the audience, and it's asking, what is a technique you would like to use when conveying your specific message itself? In other words, what sort of messaging channels have you seen the most effective in terms of the day-to-day?
Well, it depends on the type of initiative that I'm trying to promote. I will say, it's one thing we didn't really talk about today, but don't discount the importance of one-on-one meetings. We initially had a whole section in here on meetings, but I had to cut it for time. But one-on-one, which I guess is not always a meeting, but that one-on-one communication is probably as equally as important. The managing email and social media really has to do with your professional brand and making sure that people are like, oh, okay, Melissa, I trust what she has to say. She's not going to waste my time. But when it comes to actively getting someone onto your side, having a one-on-one conversation really does go a long way, especially if it's coming to a new initiative or something that might be controversial. Talking to people really does. One, it helps you realize something you may have forgotten because we don't know everything. Two, it makes them feel like they've had a point or a part in shaping whatever initiative comes to the table, so they're a little more on board. And then three, when you get to the point where you're presenting it, you can say, hey, I have this new initiative to, automate public records requests. I've already talked to, Ryan in legal, talked to, Jan in the finance office. I've talked to Laura in the in records, and they're all, I've really taken their feedback into account, and here's what we've come up with. So I would say one-on-one meetings.
Sounds good. And our next question here comes in to talk more about the topic on the presentation techniques. And so in terms of whether it be different body languages or how you want to convey, let's say, a specific message in the way that you present, what would you recommend trying and why?
To improve your presentation skills? Well, if you have a local Toastmasters group, I think Toastmasters is really beneficial, particularly if you are sort of just getting started with presenting and you want to build some experience with Toastmasters. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, you talk about yourself, basically. And you have different projects that you have to pass to become a competent communicator. And it's funny. For me, I think it's terrible. I hate talking about myself. You can have me talk about this stuff all day and I'll be perfectly comfortable. If you put me in front of a room and make me talk about myself, I'm terrified. But for most people, it's much easier to talk about ourselves and something in our lives, tell a story, than it is to, talk about work or whatever. So I would say Toastmasters is a good thing to look at. Also, I know I mentioned the Harvard Business Review. If you read the Harvard Business Review or get their magazine, they have a lot of great resources on presentations. It's one of the topics they talk about the most. They have a really good book on I think it's their Guide to Persuasive Presentations. That's very good. Also, there's a book you can get on Amazon. It's called How to Give a TED Talk. That's very good as well, and that focuses more on storytelling. So less on the actual presenting, how do I walk from here to there, and how do I avoid verbal tics, but more on how do I structure a story so it's inspirational and people really want to listen to me. And that can be very important, even if you're talking about a topic that you might consider not TED Talk worthy, but being able to structure a topic so people want to listen to you is very important. So I'd say those are some resources to definitely check out.
Absolutely. I'm definitely a big fan of Toastmasters, and I was actually just in the process of putting the books that you recommended actually in a shopping cart. So thank you for that, Melissa. In terms of resources, actually, this is a great way for us to talk about how individuals from the audience can also read a little bit more in detail about some of the different examples we utilized throughout the presentation. So I believe there were some stories that can be found on our solution exchange articles in terms of understanding different use cases, but also in terms of the different examples itself. Would you like to take a stab at it?
Yeah, if you're interested in any of the examples that Ryan and I talked about today, Fontana or Ithaca, Ryan and I, our contact information is up on the screen, and you can reach out to either of us. We'd be happy to pass that along to you. We have quite a variety of different solutions up on the Solution Exchange relating to a lot of these topics. It's laserfiche.com Solution Exchange, and you can just sort by municipal government and take a look at those. But if you're particularly interested in those solutions, either Ryan and I would be happy to share those with you.
Sounds good. All right. Well, it looks as though that was our last question of this webinar, and for those of you who are still on with us, you can go ahead and look forward to the email that will be sent out to all attendees and registrants with the online assessment there. And you'll be also emailed the deadline that will be associated with it as well. And so thank you very much, everyone. And we very much look forward to sending you that post-webinar email where you can go ahead and receive credit.
Yes, thanks so much for joining us today. We actually automated that whole process for the learning assessment and the certificate. So we were pretty excited about that. Ryan got me on board with that right away because he got the value proposition for me right away. He's like, you don't have to type anything. I said, I'm sold. So we're excited to have that all automated, so you'll get your certificate right away as soon as you complete your learning assessment. So thanks again for joining us today. We're really excited to have you all. If you have any questions, again, you can reach out to either me or Ryan. Our contact information is there on the slide. And we look forward to hopefully seeing some of you in Norfolk. Otherwise, we will be talking with you shortly.
All right. Take care now. Bye.